He rose to his full height and said my least favorite sentence in the English language. You know who I am? You used to be some kind of a jock, didn't you? Purcell looked disgusted. My name is Leroy Purcell, and yeah, I was some kind of jock. I was the kind who played tailback for Florida and spent 5 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. I really did not like the guy. Congratulations. What can I do for you? He turned deep red. I'm not used to being talked to that way. And I thought, I'm not used to entertaining murderers. I said, I didn't invite you here. You and Harpo here broke in because you wanted to see me, and you think I'm supposed to be impressed by who you are. Fine, I'm impressed. Now tell me what you want. This, I thought, is not going well. Over the past week, I'd been shot at, Susan had been shot at, her house had been vandalized, my life, Susan's life, and Carly's life had been turned upside down, and a frightened, abused teenage girl had been traumatized beyond description. It all came pouring in on me. I breathed deeply and tried to regain control. I repeated, what do you want? I was not the only one starting to lose it. Leroy Purcell said, You're not exactly impressing the shit out of me neither, McInnes. I looked at him. I came here to talk business. So talk. Are you this big an asshole with everyone? Or do you think you know something about me in particular? I'm this big an asshole with everyone. Well, asshole, we're going for a little ride. I don't think so. You want to shoot me, then shoot me. But I'm not going to get in a car and go anywhere with you two. I could have Sonny make you. I turned and looked at Sonny. His eyes were bouncing around the room, never really looking at me, but keeping me in view somehow. I said, I doubt it. And Sonny's eyes stopped ricocheting and focused. Purcell said, I don't know about you, McInnes. I don't know about you. I've taken the time to know about you. I hear you're some kind of minor league hard-ass, but old Sonny here is major league. You might say he's a professional. I shrugged. Purcell smiled, but it wasn't pretty. You need to come with us. If you do, you'll be fine. We're just going up to the plantation. If you won't come, Sonny's going to put a bullet in your ass. Oh, I guess I'll come then, Purcell said. I thought you would. I said, in case you're wondering, it was that bullet in the ass line that did the trick. That sounds like it would hurt. No one thought I was funny. Purcell drove my Jeep. He already had the keys, while Sonny and I sat in back. The back windows on a Jeep Cherokee are tinted dark. Sonny had drawn his hip gun and was keeping it leveled at my rib cage. As we approached the gate, Sonny took off his cap and placed it on the seat. Then he used his free hand to pull an old-fashioned switchblade out of his left hip pocket. He pressed the point of the blade deep enough into my side to just break the skin, and then put the gun away and placed his cap over his knife hand. Behind tinted windows, no one outside would be able to tell I was a flick of Sonny's hand away from a punctured lung. Purcell was right. Sonny seemed pretty professional. The guardhouse came up on the left, and Sonny said, Don't see nothing. The overstuffed guard's uniform shuffled to the car, was visibly and loudly impressed with Leroy Purcell's presence, and waved us through. I assumed Purcell or one of his capos had a house on the island, and that was where we were going. I was wrong. We went to Susan's beach house, and I was relieved not to see an old Ford pickup sticking out of the carport. We trudged up the wooden steps single file, and Sonny kicked in Susan's front door while Purcell and I watched. When the door splintered and swung open, Sonny limped to one side, and Purcell strutted in ahead of us like an African chieftain at a war council. Sonny sat inside. He had his gun out again, and it was pointed at me. I sighed, followed Purcell. Purcell said, this is more like it. Now, where does she keep the liquor? I didn't answer, which seemed to upset Sonny because he rapped me on the shoulder with the butt of his revolver. That was enough. I turned and hit Sonny on the bridge of his nose with a straight right that had 6 months of anger and frustration and wanting to hit someone behind it. Sonny went down. Then he came up again with blood pouring from both nostrils and every intention of killing me where I stood. Purcell yelled, Stop! Sonny looked pleadingly at Purcell, who said, Did I tell you to hit him? Sonny shook his bloody face and dripped red on the red carpet. I told you I wanted to talk to this man, and I wanted to impress him that we were serious. When I need your help impressing him, I'll tell you. You got that? Sonny nodded this time and dripped more blood on Susan's rug. I said, Can you sit up and beg?" Purcell looked pissed. "Shut the fuck up, McInnes." "Oh, it's your party." Leroy Purcell walked over to the kitchen, snatched a roll of paper towels out of its holder over the sink, and tossed it to Sonny. While Sonny put pressure on his flowing red nose, Purcell located a bottle of bourbon and mixed it with ice and Coke from the refrigerator. He walked over and sat in a chair with its back to Susan's bright view of the Gulf. He said, "Sit down." I didn't see any reason not to, so I sat on the sofa and looked out at the beach. Purcell said, "This is more like it. That fucking place you're staying is for shit." He gestured at the room. "These people got some goddamn taste." He sipped his sweetened bourbon. "Tell me, McInnes, what do you think you know about me that makes you so pissed off?" I looked at him. "What does Susan Fitzsimmons tell you about me?" I said, Who is Susan Fitzpatrick?" "Funny," he said. "Susan Fitzsimmons owns this house, and she's a client of yours. And I think that you think she and that white trash waitress from the Pelican's Roost may have seen something last Wednesday night at a house down the beach from here." He stopped for me to agree with him. I picked up a throw pillow and put it behind my head. He said, "I'm here to work something out. I really don't know what your client saw or didn't see. I'm just here for some friends who don't want any trouble. What I want is to meet with Fitzsimmons and the girl and straighten this out." Explain the problem to me. What are you going to straighten out? "Then she is your client." I repeated, "What are you going to straighten out?" He didn't answer. I said, You know what I think? I think you're scared shitless because you think someone saw you up to no good and you don't know how to find them. Look, I admit Susan Fitzsimmons has been both my client and my friend for a long time. If you got half a brain, you could find that out in an hour anyway. But she's never laid eyes on you, and if I have anything to say about it, she never will. So, you're not going to let me meet with her?" "No." Purcell rose up out of the chair. "Maybe I should convince you. Maybe you should kiss my ass." He walked toward me. I sat still. The former football hero stopped a foot from the sofa and took in a deep breath. "McInnes, all I want is a meeting, and all you got to do is say yes. It'll save your client a load of grief down the road, and it'll save you an ass-whipping right now. Think about it." He smiled. The man was thinking about hurting me, and it seemed to put him in a better mood. "Hell, McInnes, I can see you're a pretty good-sized guy. Probably push around the Nautilus machines pretty good. Probably in a spinning class down at the Fags R Us Sportsplex. But you caught Sonny by surprise. If I hadn't stopped him, you'd be dead now. And you need to understand that, even if you think you're tough, I got 50 pounds muscle on you and Sonny. You got 50 pounds hanging over your belt." And as soon as I got the words out, I realized I might have gone too far. I could feel the violence arcing like static electricity between Purcell and Sonny over my head. I could see him breathing hard, trying to regain control. Purcell raised his glass and downed what was left of his drink in one swallow. Then he turned and threw the empty glass at the kitchen sink from across the room. The crystal tumbler hit dead center on the stainless steel sink and exploded on impact. Purcell's eyes moved around the room and over Susan's things. He was thinking. He was breathing deeply and thinking. Finally, he said, "You don't understand what the fuck you're in, McInnes. You may not believe it, but me and Sonny are about the most reasonable people you're going to meet on this thing." "Yeah," I said, "you and Sonny got reasonable written all over you." Purcell huffed and shook his head. "Boy, there's tough, and there's bad, and there's just plain evil. Old Sonny there's tough. I'm tougher. I got a Super Bowl ring to prove it, but we can bring somebody into this thing who, believe me, could scare the living shit out of the toughest son of a bitch I ever saw on a football field. I make a phone call and say it's out of my hands. You're going to get to meet a mean-ass spick who'll slice you open and play with your guts while you're still alive and watching. Crazy fuck will do the same and worse, perverted sex stuff with knives and spiked shit like that to the Fitzsimmons woman and that trailer trash girl." He paused before he said, "This is your last chance to settle this normal." Purcell paused again to let me think about that, and I did. But the whole thing sounded like a lame horror story concocted to scare me into bad judgment. not to mention my concerns with Leroy Purcell's definition of normal. The threats were over the top. They were ridiculous. But Purcell said this alleged boogeyman was Hispanic, and the cold, puffy stare of the fat guy on Dog Island kept haunting me. I shook it off. Bedtime stories. Purcell looked surprised. Huh? I explained, you're full of shit. Leroy Purcell pulled a nickel-plated Colt 45 out of his waistband and chopped at my face with the barrel. I ducked and he missed. And it occurred to me that maybe I should have let him hit me. Maybe it would have been better to let him vent some violence without pulling a trigger. Purcell raised the 45 again, but not to swing it. He pointed the muzzle at my face and cocked the hammer. The room grew still. Purcell breathed hard against an adrenaline rush, and in the short eternity between his breaths, when I waited for the bullet aimed at my eyes, the only other sound was the soft hum of Susan's refrigerator. The room faded. I was focused on the gun in Purcell's giant hand, and my only conscious thought was to wonder why I hadn't noticed the refrigerator noise before. The moment passed, and a dark mist seemed to lift. The battle-scarred ex-jock rolled his shoulders to relax the muscles in his thick neck. He said, "Sonny." "Yes, sir?" Sonny sounded excited now. "You got the lighter fluid?" "Yes, sir." "Use it." Sonny appeared in the corner of my eye. I kept looking at the volcanic muzzle of Purcell's 45. Sonny moved to the wall opposite Susan's circular stairs and stopped in front of Bird Fitzsimmons' wall-sized painting of seashells. Now I looked. Sonny pulled a yellow and blue squeeze can of lighter fluid from his back pocket. "That painting's worth a fortune. The artist is dead." It was a stupid thing to say, but it was what I said. I looked up at Purcell. He had backed off a step and lowered the muzzle to point at my chest. The Saturday cookout smell of charcoal lighter fluid filled the room, and I looked over to see Sonny squirting the painting in big dripping circles. Purcell said, "We're done here. You can leave if you want to." I sat still. He walked over to the painting and pulled a Zippo from his pocket like the one Petey boy had used to light his Camel. "Just remember, all you got to do is set up a meeting with the Fitzsimmons woman and the waitress. We'll work everything out. They be safe." He spun the little black wheel on the lighter with his thumb and turned the flame all the way up. "You tell them nobody's safe. Nothing they got is safe till we work this out." And Leroy Purcell, former All-American tailback for the University of Florida, set fire to Susan's most cherished remnant of her dead husband's talented life. I shot off the sofa and ran toward the deck, and they let me. Sonny and Purcell were already on their way out the back when I got the double doors open. Behind me, flames shot 8 feet in the air, scorching the walls and threatening the house. I grabbed a lamp and swung it in a hard upward arc against the lower edge of the painting. The flaming square flew off the wall and crashed onto the carpeted floor as I jumped out of the way. The bottom left corner was untouched. I gripped it and ran across the carpet and through the doors and swung a double handful of flames over the railing and onto the sand below. Back inside, the carpet smoked and the wall was too hot to touch. I splashed pans of water on everything and called the fire department. Then I called Susan. The flirtation was gone, so were the friendly chatter and the laughter. Susan sounded dead inside. "I know it's just a painting, Tom, and I'm so thankful that you're okay, but, oh, God, Tom, what do we do now?" "Well, we damn sure don't agree to let you and Carly meet with him. I'm going to put Joey on it. We'll bug his house and where he works and every other damn thing we can think of to find out what he's up to. And if he even gets close to hurting you or Carly, we'll kill the son of a bitch." Susan didn't respond. I was mad and getting carried away, and Susan understood and let me do it. It's what angry, overwhelmed males do instead of crying. I took a few breaths. "Susan, I know, and you know, you're reacting to more than a ruined painting, even if it was one of Bird's best, so go ahead and feel bad for a while and let me take care of this. I know it doesn't look like I'm doing much of a job so far, but every time I stumble into a mess, we know a little more." I stopped and tried to focus. "I'm going to get off and call Joey now. Take care of yourself. Take care of Carly. I'll see you in a few days. And by the way, I'm going to take you up on your offer to stay in your house here on the island. I don't seem to be especially invisible in my little house down the beach, and it'll save us $800 a week for me to stay here." She agreed, and we said goodbye. It was past 5, so I decided it was okay to locate a bottle of scotch and pour some in a glass. I sat on the sofa and waited for the Apalachicola Volunteer Fire Department. 32 minutes after I dialed 911, half a dozen barbers, merchants, and mechanics came rushing through Susan's kicked-in door in full fireproof regalia. We talked. A couple of them felt the wall. One checked out the electrical system as best he could. We talked some more, and I almost told them about Leroy Purcell, but I realized it would be my word against his, and it occurred to me that the worst he'd face was financial responsibility for what he would almost certainly claim was an accidental fire. Whether it made sense or not, I decided to hold off inserting the law into my relationship with Purcell, so I told the part-time fireman of Apalachicola that I'd been trying to remove a smudge from the frame around the painting with some cleaning fluid that I had found under the kitchen sink. I said I'd stop to light a cigar, and the whole thing went up in flames. That seemed to satisfy them. They got to give me a lecture, and I got to keep my run-in with Purcell private. After the fireman departed, I sat and sipped my scotch and realized that maybe I didn't want anyone to know that I wanted Leroy Purcell dead. Right then, at that moment, I wanted and expected something terrible to happen to Purcell in the future, and when it did, I didn't want anyone looking too closely at me. Joey answered his cell phone on the second ring. "Yeah." I said, "It's me. What's wrong?" "How'd you know something was wrong?" An edge had crept into Joey's voice. It was as close as he ever got to sounding panicked. "Are the women okay?" Yeah, Ludi and her guests are fine. I'm over on St. George at Susan's house. I had some trouble." "You sound like your puppy died," he said. "And I thought you were going to stay away from Susan's house. Hell, you should have known they'd be looking for you, Tom. I mean, shit, I'm guessing you're okay, or I wouldn't be running off at my mouth. You are okay, aren't you?" "Yeah, Joey, I'm fine. I'm about as pissed off as I've ever been in my life, but I'm fine." "As pissed off as you've ever been is pretty pissed." I didn't say anything. "What do you need?" "Is our boy Haycock in his cottage?" "He's there. He's got a little stringy-haired woman in there with him. I sneaked up to the house and checked on him a little while ago, and I'm sorry I did. The two of them were buck naked and tangled up, banging away like a couple of stray dogs. I'm telling you, after seeing that, I need to go watch some hogs humping to put the romance back in my life." "So it looks like he's staying put for a while." "Yeah," Joey said. "I don't think he's going anywhere tonight." "Come over then. We got a lot to talk about." I hadn't thought about the ferry and whether Joey could even get off the island. More than an hour after Purcell and Sonny's exit, I was still pumping too much adrenaline to think about much but murder. So I wasn't surprised when Joey walked into Susan's charred living room. I was sitting in the chair Purcell had used. Joey stopped in the middle of the room, surveyed the black mess where Bird Fitzsimmons' painting had hung. "What the hell happened?" I raised a glass of scotch, tipped it at him, and took a swallow. "Shit, when you told me you had some trouble, I figured you got your ass whipped or something. What'd they do? Try to burn the place down?" "You ever hear of a prick named Leroy Purcell? Used to play for the Cowboys?" "Yeah, he's a scumbag." My giant friend paused and looked stunned. "Purcell was here? He did that?" "Yeah, he was here. And he set fire to Susan's favorite painting by her dead husband and came real close to burning the whole place down. It's supposed to be a lesson about what he'll do to everything Susan owns if she and Carly don't meet with him to discuss the guy he murdered in front of Carly." Joey stood and walked to the kitchen. When he came back, he had a glass full of ice cubes, which he covered with amber whiskey from my half-empty bottle. "Shit, Tom, I've been hearing rumors about Leroy Purcell ever since he left the pros. It's pretty much common knowledge he likes to hang out with hoods and gamblers, and he's gotten ass-deep in a lot of shady deals down here in Florida." Joey stopped to turn up his glass. He was not a sipper. Joey drank scotch the way he drank beer and orange juice and everything else. He swallowed a mouthful of whiskey and said, "The guy had about 1,000,000 opportunities to make an honest living when he came back from the pros. They love the bastard down here, but word is he likes the action, likes the dangerous reputation." Joey clinked the ice in his glass and looked out at the night. "So it was Purcell who Carly saw shoot that guy in the beach house?" "Yeah, that's what I'm telling you." Joey cussed and shook his head and drank more scotch. I asked, "Can you let go of watching Haycock for a few days?" Joey said, "I could do whatever you need me to do." "I want to know what Purcell's doing. I want to know who he talks to, where he goes, and who he's sleeping with. I want to know everything I can about what he's up to, because we've got to know if he's getting close to finding Susan and Carly. I'll bury him in bugs, get his house, his car, tap his phones, but I'm going to need to pull Ludi off guard duty to help with this if you want me to keep covering Haycock. I can put another man on Susan and Carly if you want. Yeah, do that. The whole point is to keep them safe. In the meantime, we've got to find a way to stop Purcell for good. Short of killing him." I didn't say anything, and Joey noticed. He seemed to think about that, then asked, "Did you report him setting the fire?" "No." Joey thought a little while longer. "Anyone know you two had this run-in?" "Just the guy who helped him set it." And Joey slowly nodded his head. Joey knew that Susan didn't need or deserve any more pain in her life. If it came to it, Joey would snap Purcell's neck without thought or regret. Now, though, as the idea of murderous revenge turned real, I began to hope it wouldn't come to that. Joey got up to leave, and I walked him to the door. He asked why he hadn't seen my Jeep outside when he drove up. I told him about Purcell commandeering the vehicle, and he offered to get me a car. I shook my head. I could have one brought over in the morning. At the door, Joey hesitated. It never would have entered my mind that Leroy Purcell would be blowing people away. I thought he just liked hanging out with hoods, trying to look tough. Murder and arson with Sonny the Psycho to back him up, not to mention him threatening teenage girls. Not exactly what I'd call tough, I said. A real All-American, huh? Yeah, a real All-American asshole. With a fresh whiskey, I walked out on the deck. Bird seashells were ash, but their charcoal frame drew a black square in the sand where it had landed and burned. Small flaps of charred canvas ruffled and flitted down the beach ahead of the breeze and disappeared into the dusk. Leaving my drink untouched on the railing, I went inside and climbed the bright aluminum stairs to the second floor. Susan had abandoned her house in a hurry. The bathrooms were ready for the morning showers she took instead at Ludi's house after fleeing killers in her own home. I lay on Susan's bed and breathed in the smell of her and tried to think. Outside, through the windows I had stood before while Susan slept, the sunset splashed the horizon with oranges and pinks and purples and streaked the ocean with jagged ripples of molten silver and gold. I rolled off the bed, stripped, walked into the bathroom, and turned on the shower. As the water began to heat and steam clouded the ceiling, I looked at the guy in the mirror. I wasn't impressed. The shower felt good, and it kept on feeling good until Susan's water heater was drained and tepid. I found a box with some of Bird's old clothes in it and put them on. My stuff was back on the guest room bed at Pastel Hell, and I didn't feel like hiking. Back downstairs, I found my unfinished drink and poured it over the weathered banister into the sand below. Sharp white pricks dotted the eastern sky above a smudged black horizon, and the approaching night washed the sky with charcoals that faded overhead to the soft gray tones of summer flannel. In the west, the last thin blue tint of daylight hung in a crescent-shaped curtain above the horizon. I peered through the settling night at the white-capped gulf and at the shadowed rows of elaborate summer houses repeating along the shore like monuments in a cemetery. I thought about the sums of money represented by these extravagant playhouses, and not just the capital it took to build or buy them, but about the kind of money a man or woman had to have to be able to invest in a 3-story Caribbean-style weekend retreat on a manicured ribbon of sand in the Gulf of Mexico. I thought about all the doctors, lawyers, and software executives who owned vacation homes in the plantation, and I wondered if Leroy Purcell thought he was one of them. I wondered if he thought he was a member of that club. Back inside, I dialed Joey's cell number. "Joey?" "Yeah." He sounded tired. "Ain't this some shit?" Joey was eloquent, and he was right. This was indeed some shit. I said, "You think your buddies on the Panama City force could tell us whether Purcell is mixed up with the Bodines?" "Yeah, I thought of that, too. Just got off the phone. One of the cops, a guy named Kusa, said the rumor is Purcell runs the Bodines up there around Panama City. He didn't know anything about Apalachicola. See if you can find out if someone else runs the Bodines down here. And as soon as possible, I want to know where Purcell lives and where he works. Yeah, we talked about that. You wanted me to spread some bugs around, remember? I said, this is something else. I'm thinking that maybe we need to split Purcell's attention, give him something else to worry about. How are we going to do that? I'm not sure yet. I've still got to figure out whether this is a good idea or if I just want to yank his chain because of today. Just get his home and office addresses and check on whether Purcell is the king of the Jethros or just one of several. I want to know if he's messing around in somebody else's backyard. We'll figure out the rest as we go, I said. Can you do that? Sure. I'll just check back in with Kusa. Sorry, Tom. This boy don't do nothing for free. Who does? Look, I got something to tell you. I planned to tell you on St. George, but you had other things on your mind. Anyway, I got a name on the fat guy Aycock smuggled in, Joey said. It took a few tries to get to the desk at Captain Casey's inn without somebody around. But last night, I checked out the card file. They ain't even got a T. It's going to turn out to be some kind of alias, but the guy's name on the card was El Carpintero. Joey spelled the name. Mean anything to you? No, but I'll make a note. It may fit in somewhere if we find out something else. We said goodbye, and I went in search of a hammer and nails, which I found in a combination laundry and storage room under the stilted house. After nailing Sonny's kicked-in door shut, I went to bed. Susan's pillow held the soft feminine scents of her shampoo and cologne and makeup and some other girl's smell I couldn't identify. An overwhelming loneliness enveloped me like a physical presence, and I fell asleep. I was up before the sun with more than 4 hours sleep, but less than I'd had the night before. It was as if my mind were signaling that my level of screwed-upness had digressed, but not to the depths I had occupied before finding some sort of redemption in helping Susan and Carly. The hot water heater had recovered from my abuse. I showered, ate a few bites of a hard-aged croissant from Susan's refrigerator, and struck out along the bright morning beach in the direction of my pastel palace. Purcell had returned my Jeep to the parking space beneath the house. Inside, I half expected the place to be stained somehow with Purcell's intrusion, but everything was the way it had been since I arrived. Back in the guest room, my wrinkled clothes were scattered across the bed, which was my doing. I changed out of Bird's clothes and into a pair of jeans and a faded red pullover. I traded sandy running shoes for New Balance cross trainers, packed up, and left. My plan was to drive over to East Point and look for Petey Boy's friend, Billy Teeter. I tossed my duffel in the back seat. The keys were under the floor mat where I'd asked Joey to leave them, and an envelope had been snapped under the windshield wiper like a parking ticket. I was inside the Jeep when I saw it. Stepping out, I pulled up the wiper and lifted out a white business envelope gone floppy with salt spray from a night facing the waves. The moist envelope tore easily and unevenly. It held a single sheet of copy paper. Report on Carly Santana. Alias. Name, Carly Pultrez. Age 15. Hair, black. Eyes, brown. Approximately 5'4", 110 pounds. Pultrez is a runaway miner from Gloucester, Massachusetts. Address, 2128 Cleaver Head Road. She has a record going back 3 years as a repeat runaway. Her father, Russ Pultrez, owns and operates a fishing vessel out of Gloucester. Russ Pultrez contact report. That was it. Before making the copy, someone had placed 2 large Post-it notes over the rest of the page, including, I guessed, the name and signature of the investigator. Also, I could see the outline of a smaller Post-it at the top, covering a letterhead. I removed my keys from the ignition and went back inside to call Susan with more bad news. When she answered, she sounded a little better than she had the night before. How's Carly? She seems fine, but then she always does. This has to be wearing on her, though. How are you? A lot better, thanks. I'd kind of like to see you, even though I know that's not really in the cards right now, but I wanted you to know that I want to. Losing Scattered Shells was difficult for me because I'll always love Bird, but that doesn't mean I'm not ready to see you and enjoy being with you. She hesitated. Unless I'm taking too much for granted. You're not. And she wasn't, but for some reason she was making me uncomfortable. I retreated into the business at hand. I'm sorry to do this to you, but I'm afraid I have some more disturbing news. Purcell knows who Carly is. Yes, you told me that last night. You said he's looking for both of us. No, you don't understand. He knows who Carly really is. I said, I slept at your house last night. When I got back to my rental this morning, someone had placed part of a private investigator's report under my windshield wiper. They did it this morning? I don't understand. Purcell and his goon drove me to your house in my Jeep, then left with it. It was here with the envelope stuck under the windshield wiper when I got back this morning. How did you get back? I walked. Oh. I told her what the report said. I also suggested that I'd rather deliver the news to Carly in person, so I could advise her on how to proceed. Susan asked, "Are you coming back then?" "Probably tomorrow. Today I've got to go find an old shrimper named Billy Teeter." "Well, you may as well go get some breakfast then. The places over there that open on Sunday don't open until 1. You know, church." I told Susan again I'd see her Monday or Tuesday and hung up. The island had 5 restaurants/bars, and they all had signs advertising Sunday brunch. I chose the Pelican's Roost, where Carly had worked. Susan said it was good, and I thought I'd probably needed to look around the place sooner or later anyway, so I turned in and parked in the gravel lot and stepped back out into the warm morning air. A pair of plate glass windows stared blankly out at the parking lot from either side of the front door. I turned the knob and stepped inside. The waiting area was the bar, but there was no wait. Another nut-brown waitress, this one with long brown hair and crow's feet, led me up narrow steps to the second floor, which was furnished with a dozen or so round tables and 2 long picnic tables hidden beneath plastic red and white checked tablecloths. Wide crank-out windows lined both long walls, and a door in the short front wall led out onto a small balcony or deck overlooking the parking lot and a crowded queue of beach houses across the way. Ocean breeze wafted in through open windows on one wall and out through matching windows on the opposite wall. All in all, the place was simple and more pleasant than it sounds. 7 or 8 people were scattered among the tables, and my suntanned waitress smiled and patted my back in a mildly flirtatious way and suggested that I might want to eat out on the deck. I said okay, and she led me and deposited me near the right front corner where I had a narrow view of the water between 2 rows of anorectic, architecturally strident sliver houses. She asked if I wanted coffee. I said I did, and she promised to be right back. After she left, I looked out at the distant wedge of water for a while. I moved on to an examination of the skinny vacation houses in the mostly deserted street. I watched a bouncing tube-top jogger until she was out of sight. Finally, I glanced down at the parking lot. This was not going to be an enjoyable meal. There, in the driver's seat of a Cobra convertible, sat gun-toting, knife-poking, paint-dribbling Sonny. And he was watching me with those jittery, psychotic eyes of his. Either Sonny was scaling new heights of incompetence, or I was supposed to know he was following me. The Cobra's top was down, and he had parked only 10 or 12 feet from my Jeep in an otherwise empty section of the lot. So, considering how rattled I guessed I was supposed to be by Sonny's blatant disrespect for my privacy, I had 3 obvious alternatives. 1, I could get mad and beat him about the head and shoulders, which would net me either an arrest or an ass-whipping. 2, I could respect his wishes and panic, which was what Purcell was counting on. Or 3, I could decide to mess with him. Sonny may have been a professional thug, but he still looked like a dumbass to me. When my waitress returned, I ordered steak and eggs with an English muffin and a double order of cheese grits on the side. Contrary to popular belief outside the South, if properly prepared and eaten while steaming hot, cheese grits are actually pretty damn good and almost identical to polenta, which every pseudo-sophisticate in the country likes to see piled next to grilled medallions of veal. But in this instance, I didn't much care whether the grits were well made, and I purposely let them chill into a thick glutinous mass while I forked beef and eggs into my mouth. I was full. Time to make grit bombs. I pulled 4 paper napkins from the dispenser on my table and put 3 large dollops of cheese grits on each napkin. My waitress came out and gave me a concerned look. I said, saving them for later. She smiled the way people smiled at paranoid schizophrenics in Central Park and went back inside. As I pulled the napkin's four corners up and around each grit wad and twisted the ends together, Sonny looked up and gave me a self-satisfied grin, and for the first time, I noticed the blurry prison tattoo Joey had described. On Sonny's left triceps was a large, deep blue dagger with 3 letters above its handle and 3 more beneath its point. I couldn't make out the initials, but they had to be the R.I.P. and R.E.T. Joey had seen on Haycock's partner that violent night in the parking lot of Mother's Milk in Apalachicola. I smiled back at him. "Good to see you, too, asshole." Something seemed to catch the corner of Sonny's eye, and he turned toward the bike path running next to the street to check out a plump blonde in a thong. As he turned away, I completed my first package by dunking it in ice water just before I stood, took aim, and literally creamed him behind his left ear. The man said some really bad words. While he screamed, I dunked the second grit ball. He ducked. This, I thought, is fun. I let him duck. This sticky handful was headed for the center of his shiny black hood. It hit with a deeply satisfying thud and splattered like a baseball-sized wad of pelican droppings. Sonny jumped up from behind the dash to see what had happened. I was waiting. Damn, I missed him, and sent a thick smear of cheese grits across his leather seats. Sonny went nuts. The car door flew open, and he jumped out onto the gravel parking lot screaming, flailing his arms, and generally cussing a lot. His sentences were liberally sprinkled, I noticed, with the words kill and dead, and seemed to be directed at me and those I hold dear. I dunked the last grit ball and let it fly. He tried to catch it, no doubt intending to send it back my way. But you can't really catch a wet paper napkin full of grit paste. It exploded in his hand, splattering a nicely formed pattern of cheese grits across his face, neck, and chest. That just about did it. Sonny charged the restaurant through the front door downstairs. I had already dropped $20 on the table. No reason to stick around now. I picked up my steak knife, stepped over the railing, and carefully dropped 8 or 9 feet to the ground. My knees would pay later, but now I was too pumped to care. Pulling keys from my pocket, I sprinted over to Sonny's $40,000 Mustang, plunged the serrated steak knife into the side of his tire, twisted with all my strength, and left it there. I had turned back toward the Jeep and had just shot the doors open with the remote when I heard a murderous yell from the restaurant deck. I caught a blur of Sonny jumping as I scrambled into the Jeep and jammed the key in the ignition. Good Jeep. It cranked, and flooring the gas even before I found reverse, I spewed a dusty semicircle of bleached gravel and broken shells across the parking lot. As I dropped the transmission into drive, I hazarded a glance at what I was sure would be Sonny crouched in a shooter's stance unloading a full clip in my direction. What I saw instead was Sonny rolling on his back in sand and gravel, holding his left knee in the air and gripping it with both hands. His mouth gaped open, his face burned red, and tendons strained beneath the thick skin on his neck. He seemed to be screaming, but by then I was gone. I was looking at maybe 45 minutes to an hour before Sonny reported my escape to Purcell. First, the pain and the anger would have to subside to a point that would allow rational thought, or whatever Sonny used instead. Then Sonny would have to think of a way to explain to his boss that I got away by attacking him with an arsenal of cheese grits. Hell, it might take more than an hour. Only 100 yards down, I swerved right onto the causeway and backed off on the gas. I didn't think Sonny would or even could follow, but whether he could or not, a 2-lane road with deep choppy water on each side is no place to play chase. Better to be caught, I thought, than wind up breathing salt water with my headlights buried in the sandy bottom. But he didn't catch me, or, as far as I could see, even try, and after 4 miles of glancing back and forth from the wide pavement ahead to the narrow strip of blacktop in my rearview mirror, I rolled onto the mainland, tailless. Less than a quarter mile in, a country road angled off to the right. I followed it through stands of scruffy coastal pines into the quintessential shrimping village of East Point. The right side of the road was perfect, a jumbled, rusting, dirty, and everything a seafaring town should be. tin-roofed seafood shacks and shrimp processing plants fronted the street and backed up to long concrete docks that reached out into Apalachicola Bay like gray fingers separated by oily water and a scattering of white shrimp boats with red and blue trim. Unfortunately, across the road from the local shrimp entrepreneurs, the place got ugly fast. A plastic orange Citgo station squatted next to a new brick and plate glass Piggly Wiggly, which led to a blue plastic gas station that offered a free car wash with each fill-up. I decided Petey Boy's friend Billy Teeter would have a place on the water, as much because that's the direction I wanted to look as anything. So that's where I concentrated my search. Although considering that one can drive completely through East Point in less than 5 minutes, search may be a more impressive description than the process warranted. Maybe 2 minutes after leaving the causeway, Teeters came up on the right. I wasn't much worried now about Sonny. Even if he had recovered from his hurt knee and stabbed tire, he would assume I had turned west toward Apalachicola, Panama City, and Mobile. Just to be sure, though, I checked the mirror once more for his psychotic presence before pulling up onto a sandy parking area just deep enough to hold the Jeep without donating a bumper to passing traffic. Teeter's Seafood Shack was just that, unpainted, weathered boards beneath a rusted tin roof, and a sagging front porch made for sitting. 2 aluminum patio chairs flanked the door. An old man suitable for casting in Captain Courageous lounged in one. With miles of sapphire waters, distant islands, and endless blue skies stretched out behind them, these locals spent their days watching traffic pass in front of a Citgo station. I cut the engine, stepped out onto a sandy yard, and walked 2 steps to the bottom of Teeter's 3 wooden steps. I said, "Petey Boy sent me here." The old man perked up. "Me and Petey Boy grew up together." He smiled, and a mouthful of tobacco-stained teeth peeked out shyly from the thick brown and gray brush that obscured his face from the nostrils and cheekbones down. "Are you, Billy Teeter?" "Yes, sir, that I am." I smiled. The old man looked happy to sit and talk, but his young one was looking for a sale. I said, "Petey Boy sent me over here because I need some information about who might have been out on the bay the other night. He said Billy Teeter would be able to help if anyone could." The old man said, "What did Petey Boy volunteer me for?" As he spoke, Billy Teeter sat forward in his chipped metal chair, pulled off his Bubba Gump shrimp cap, slicked a few long strands of gray hair back over his spotted bald pate, and resettled the cap. "Mr. Teeter, Petey Boy didn't volunteer you. He just said you were somebody I could ask about boats in Apalachicola Bay without getting into trouble for asking. My name is Tom McInnes, and I'm from Mobile. I'm trying to find out if any boats just up from Central or South America might have been laying off Dog Island one night last week." Teeter harumphed. I've always read about people harumphing, but never knew exactly what that was until that old shrimper did it. I was losing him. When I had become nothing but a memory for the old man, he would have to go on living there on the Gulf. He would have to keep living among men and women who might work in a little contraband when the fishing got slow, and who wouldn't appreciate Teeter discussing that embarrassing sideline with an outsider. From his viewpoint, there was no reason on earth to tell some rich-looking city guy about things that weren't anybody's business. I decided to get very honest. Petey Boy sent me because I'm trying to help a young girl in trouble. Leroy Purcell's mixed up in it, and he's got some crazy-looking son of a bitch named Sonny following me around. Now, I know all that sounds like a really good reason to go inside your place there and leave me alone, but I need help. I can take care of myself, but there's a teenage girl in a world of trouble, and I don't know how else to get her out of it but to figure out what's going on down here. Billy Teeter leaned back in his chair and studied me. I shut up and let him. "What night?" "Last Thursday." Dog Island, you say?" I nodded, and he thought some. "No way to know where somebody's coming from. See a fancy yacht anchored out there. You don't know if it's coming from Tampa or Timbuktu. So there ain't no way to know if a vessel that might have been out there come in from where you're talking about." Teeter put the soles of his salt-crusted work boots up on the 2x4 railing and rocked up onto the back legs of the chair. "Yes, sir. I was out on Thursday, and there was one of them fancy fiberglass motor yachts out of Dog Island. Couldn't tell you where it comes from, and didn't have no name you could see." I was quickly becoming a big Billy Teeter fan. I motioned at the empty chair on the porch and said, Mind if I sit down? No, don't mind a bit. Take a load off. Teeter lowered his voice to a conspiratorial level. Want a cigarette? I smiled. No, thank you. Then I asked, how can you remember so much about a no-name yacht you just happened to see one night last week? Because of what you just said. Didn't have no name. I seen this yacht laying off Dog Island when I was out last Thursday. I pretty much called it a night, so I made up my mind to cut over close to the thing and get a good look at it. You don't see many like that around here. Down around Tampa, Miami, sure, hell yeah, you see them all the time. But not too many of them up this way, if you see what I'm saying. Anyway, I cruise over thinking maybe we'll look her over. Maybe see some rich guy drinking champagne, looking at the stars. Anyway, I pull up pretty close alongside and see that the vessel ain't got no name painted on it. Now, what it was somebody had taped a sheet of white plastic or something over the name. Billy Teeter flipped the butt of his Kool out into the sand. Then he looked back over his shoulder at the door and whispered, reckon I'll smoke one more. I waited while he got it going. You said the yacht had its name covered? Yeah, that's right. Had it covered right up. So, I figured they're up to no good. So I take a turn around the thing and head home. I was thinking this was all a little too neat. I said, I guess Petey Boy sent me to the right place. Teeter pulled hard at his Kool and let the heavy smoke puff out of his mouth and nose as he spoke. Petey Boy already knew all this. Him and me talked about it last week the morning I got in. I reckon he just didn't figure it was his business to be telling you about it. He done the right thing by sending you over here, though. Mr. Teeter, I appreciate you telling me this. I don't know how it'll help my young friend yet, but every little bit helps. I stopped to think and said, can you describe that boat to me? I know it'd be a long shot, but I need to try to identify it if I can. He smiled. Sure, I can do that, but it ain't really necessary. What with the name covered up and all, I copied the registration number off the hull. He motioned inside. I got it back there with the records of the catch that night. You're kidding. No, sir. Well, why on God's green earth would someone cover a boat's name and not its registration numbers? 'Cause of the Coast Guard, Teeter said. Everybody names boats, but you don't have to. It ain't a law. People just do it. But you gotta register a boat, and you gotta have its registration numbers prominently displayed, as they say, on the hull. That's the law. So a fella could get by with covering over the name if that's what he wanted to do, but you cover over the registration numbers, and you're pretty much gonna get yourself boarded by the Coast Guard if the ATF or the immigration folks don't get to you first. Will you give me the number? I reckon. But listen, I know you're helping a little girl, and I believe you and all, but it wouldn't hurt my feelings none if you thought that number was worth a few dollars. Strange, Petey Boy wouldn't take money when I offered it, and Billy Teeter had come right out and asked for it. But if pressed, I couldn't tell you which was the better man. Different people have different rules and different needs. I pulled out my wallet and found a $50 bill. Teeter put out his calloused hand, and I pressed it into his palm. He said, I appreciate it. Then he stood and walked inside. When he came back, he handed me a scrap of brown wrapping paper with a dozen numbers and letters written on it in ballpoint pen. He said, I copied it off for you. I need to hold on to the paper I wrote it on the other night. Got other stuff on it I need. How much money do you make in a good night on the water? Teeter looked guarded but not offended. All he said was, it depends. If I paid you, say, $200, would that be enough to get you to lay off shrimping for a night and take me out? Well, it'd be enough, depending on what you wanted to do when you got out there. Same thing you did last week. Just get a good look at whoever's out there. Teeter's eyes narrowed. $250. I laughed out loud and walked over to shake his hand. It's a deal. I'll give you as much notice as I can, but it may be a last-minute thing. Teeter took the torn paper from my hand, pulled a ballpoint out of his shirt pocket, and jotted down a phone number. He said, just call me. If I'm here, I'll do it. If I ain't, that means I'm probably out working, and you'll have to get up with me when I get back in. I thanked him again and trotted down the 3 wooden steps to my Jeep. As I pulled open the door, Teeter called out, Mr. McInnes. I stopped and looked at him. You said a couple of names when you first got here. Leroy, Purcell, and Sonny? He nodded. I don't mean to be talking out of school, but you be careful of them two, you hear me? You're messing around with people who'll cut your throat for looking at them wrong. And if you're getting in their business, you're asking for a heap of trouble. Why are you helping me then? Aren't you scared of them? Billy Teeter, 70-something ex-Marine and secret menthol cigarette smoker, smiled the smile of the toughest kid in the Franklin County class of '42 and made 2 knowing syllables of one short word. Shit. The drive to Mobile was excruciatingly, perhaps unnecessarily long. Visions of Sonny lying in wait along the Panhandle's famous Highway 98, holding in my imagination a scoped sniper's rifle, encouraged me to find my way home along a network of interconnected county and state roads until I was out of Florida. Pelting Sonny with grit bombs had been stupid, but fun. This scurrying along backcountry roads to avoid his wrath was even dumber. No fun at all, and more than a little humiliating. It was nearly 9 when I finally parked beneath a thick-branched water oak on Monterey Street next to Ludy's brick walkway. Stepping out into the spring night, I breathed in the old neighborhood smells of azaleas, bougainvillea, wisteria, and the first grass clippings of the season. Aromatherapy. All thoughts of Leroy Purcell and psychotic Sonny dissolved and floated away on the soft mix of nostalgic scents as I walked across the bricks to the front door. Susan said, "Carly knows Purcell paid you a visit." "Does she know about the investigator's note?" Susan shook her head. I said, "Come on, let's go back to the kitchen where we can get comfortable and talk." Carly asked, "What's going on?" We've got a lot of information now. A lot of it's helpful and some of it's disturbing. Come on, I need to fill you in. We sat at the table and I talked. Susan had steeled Carly for the involvement of Leroy Purcell, and my young client had, it seemed, come to terms with Purcell knowing about Carly Santana. She was less prepared to hear that Purcell knew about Carly Poultrez. As I described finding the investigator's report under my windshield wiper, blood drained from Carly's lips. When I placed the report on the creme tablecloth in front of her, the rest of her face lost color. Her small ears, visible because she had swept her dark hair back in a ponytail, turned fiery red and made her face look even paler. "What's this mean at the bottom? Russ Poultrez contact report? What's that mean, Tom? There's nothing after it." I tried to avoid answering the question she was actually asking. "It looks like somebody covered up the rest of it before they made the copy." Carly looked hard into my eyes and poked the report with her finger for emphasis. "Cut out, Tom. What's this mean about a contact report?" "It means they found my father and talked with him, doesn't it? Isn't that what it means?" "Well, I think it means Purcell wants us to believe his investigator met with your father. It could be nothing, just something to make us nervous, to make you do something stupid." She shook her head from side to side as I spoke. "The name's right. The address is right." I couldn't think of anything useful or comforting to say about that, so I pushed on and reported my dialogue with Billy Teeter. It didn't help. Carly's eyes grew larger, and edges of her eyelids turned bright red. What's that stuff got to do with me? I don't care if Leroy Purcell is smuggling drugs or people or anything else. I just want him to leave me alone. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Tell him I don't care about what he does. Tell him I just want him, leave me alone. I'll go away. I'll go out west somewhere and I'll forget I've ever heard of him." Susan put her hand on Carly's back to console her. Carly pushed it away. My young client thought we had failed her. We were quiet for a while. I tried to think. Carly's movements grew less frenetic. Her shoulders relaxed. She wiped away the tears. The central air cycled off, and the quiet hum fell away to reveal a chorus of crickets beneath the kitchen window. When the tears had stopped, I said, "The reason you can't just tell Purcell you'll leave him alone is that the way he looks at it, he never knows when you'll show up and blackmail him to keep him quiet. And Carly, the fact that you'd never blackmail him is irrelevant. He'd do it, so he figures you would too." Carly looked down at the tablecloth, but her eyes were focused 1,000 miles away. I glanced up at Susan and went on, "Carly, even if we somehow got Purcell to say he'd leave you alone, you couldn't trust him. He's the kind of man who'll make a deal, then stick a knife in your stomach while you're shaking on it." Carly began to cry again, and Susan gave me an angry look. I'm sorry, Carly. I'm sorry to say it that way, but you have to understand who you're dealing with. You cannot convince yourself that you can end this with a phone call or a meeting. And right now, we don't have enough evidence to get Purcell convicted of the murder you witnessed. We could get him arrested, maybe, but he'd never go to jail based on what we've got. Now, under normal circumstances, we could report the crime, Put it on the record that you witnessed the murder and make it hard for Purcell to retaliate without getting in more trouble. But, Carly, these aren't normal circumstances. First of all, you're a runaway. The cops would almost certainly send you back to Massachusetts. Second, from what I've seen, Leroy Purcell is one hell of a long way from normal. I'm afraid he'd worry about getting rid of witnesses first and how to deal with your obvious disappearance down the road somewhere. Remember, Purcell is a violent, explosive man. He's where he is because he's crazy enough to do things that even other criminals wouldn't do. Sooner or later, it'll catch up with him. A man can't go on forever killing and setting fires to settle disputes. But for now, he's kind of bulletproof because he is so damn crazy. Carly had stopped crying. Tears had drawn dark trails down her cheeks to her jawline, just as they had the first time I spoke with her. She said, "You said he's bulletproof, but he's not. I know what you mean. He's not. A bullet would kill him." I looked at Susan, who raised her eyebrows as if to say, who can blame her? I let the subject drop. Carly left to wash her face. I found bread in Ludy's wormwood cupboard and roast beef, mayonnaise, mustard, and farmer's cheese in the stainless steel refrigerator. Susan said that she and Carly had eaten. I built 2 sandwiches for myself and had eaten one and started on the second by the time Carly came back in the room. It was a few minutes after 10 now. Carly said, "I'm tired. This is a lot. I mean, it's a lot to think about. I'm just going to go to bed." And she left Susan and me alone in the kitchen as the air conditioner cycled on again, deadening the mating calls of the crickets that lived in Ludy's shrubbery. She does that a lot. What? When things get bad, she goes to bed. Nothing wrong with it. I just noticed that people in prison do that. Go to bed early? No, not just that. They sleep all the time because they can't stand where they are. It's like temporary suicide. If you're not conscious, you don't have to feel bad. I read about it for the first time after Watergate. Ehrlichman, I think it was, commented in an interview that all these white-collar crooks in minimum security slept their time away. I asked, "Has Carly been sleeping much during the day?" "Sure." "Well, come to think of it, she takes a nap every afternoon. I just thought she was bored." Maybe she is. I'm just armchair shrinking to avoid some unpleasant thoughts of my own, but hell, we're making pretty fast progress. I don't know how it's all going to finally fall together, but I think it will in the end. I motioned at the door Carly had gone through on her way to bed. It's tough for her, though. Susan said, "It's been a tough couple of days for you, too. What do you say we go veg out in front of the TV? We won't even watch Nightline. We'll watch Leno or Letterman." It's Sunday. Susan grabbed my hand and pulled me up and toward the living room. Then we'll find a great old movie and forget the real world is even out there. Rear Window and Get Shorty were still on top of the VCR from 2 nights earlier. Susan said, "Ludy was saying the other night when you rented Rear Window that she already had it. Apparently she's a Hitchcock nut." Susan opened a narrow-painted pine cabinet next to the converted antique shift robe that held Ludy's TV and said, "Look, every Hitchcock I'd ever seen, along with a few I didn't know existed, was lined up on rows of shallow shelves. Hitch had his own ordered space on the top 3 racks. Ludy's other videos were there, but they were out of order and clearly subservient to Sir Alfred's body of work." Susan said, "What about Dial M for Murder? Pop it in." And she did. Instead of previews, the tape started with a film lesson on Alfred Hitchcock and his penchant for upper-crust-looking blondes. Susan disappeared. I watched Janet Leigh, Tippi Hedren, Grace Kelly, Doris Day, and Kim Novak take turns looking horrified. 3 or 4 minutes of that went by, and Susan reappeared holding a cold bottle of Chardonnay, 2 tulip-shaped glasses, and a corkscrew. She said, "All part of the program. Watch what's his name? Robert Cummings and Grace Kelly smooch. Drink a little wine and see where it leads." I said, "You do know there's kind of a grisly murder in the movie, too." "Oh, I can take it if you can," and sat on the sofa next to me. I performed the oddly satisfying job of cutting and peeling foil from the bottle's neck. The cork came out in one piece, and the slightly greenish spirits flowed into both expectant glasses with minimal mess. We settled back and sipped some of the buttery Chardonnay. I'm not much of a white wine drinker, but you don't tell a woman who has surprised you with a romantic gesture that you'd just as soon have red wine, or maybe even a little scotch if she has it. We settled into the cushions as an oversized finger began to dial an old-fashioned rotary phone. Hitch showed the mechanical telephone machinery jump and shudder in response to the movements of the finger. And there she was, Grace Kelly, and she was kissing Robert Cummings, of all people. I said, Now, explain this to me. She's got this dashing former international tennis star husband at home who's a prick, but she doesn't know that, not to mention that she could get pretty much any other man she wants, and she decides to go after Bob Cummings? What the hell is that about? Susan cleared her throat, and I turned to look at her. She gave me a sidelong look that said, "You're ruining the mood, dummy," and took in a small sip of wine. I turned back to the movie, and for the first time noticed the warmth of Susan's thigh and knee against my leg, where she had turned ever so slightly my way and ever so casually rested her leg on mine. Oh, and she'd been resting her empty hand on my shoulder in what I thought was a friendly and comfortable way. Oh, again, I can take a hint, so long as it's sufficiently obvious and prolonged. Susan was wearing a simple white pullover with short sleeves, a crew neck, and a squared shirt tail that hung untucked over blue shorts that sort of looked like a miniskirt, until you realized they were shorts. I shifted the glass to my right hand and casually, I hoped, placed my left hand on Susan's leg in what I also hoped was an intimate as opposed to a blatantly horny gesture. When I did, she lifted her hand from my shoulder and began to stroke my hair. It felt wonderful. It was relaxing. And I felt sleepy. Yawn now and you're a dead man. Instead, I leaned toward Susan, and she took away any chance of awkwardness by folding into me so that our lips met perfectly and softly. I wasn't sleepy anymore. Time floated as we kissed gently. We parted, and I looked for any caution or concern on her face. She looked happy. Susan hummed. I put my glass on the coffee table and smiled. "You're pretty vocal, aren't you?" As Susan leaned her face in close to mine, she said, "You have no idea." This time, our mouths and tongues melted together. We pulled closer, and I moved my hand over her thigh just to feel the silkiness of her legs. As I did, Susan reached down and placed her hand over mine. "Sorry," and she smiled. Susan pulled my hand up and inside her shirt and cupped it over her left breast. She said, "High school, remember?" I caressed her through a thin layer of cotton, and as we kissed again, slid my hand down and then back up inside her sports bra. Her breast felt hot and firm, and I could feel the tiny rhythmic thuds of her heart beating. I desperately wanted, even needed, to move my mouth down and across her neck and collarbone and shoulders, to kiss her breasts and hold her nipples inside my mouth. I kissed her throat, and she pulled away just enough to click off the lamp on the end table, pull her shirt and bra over her head, and toss them aside. She lay back against the pillows and pulled me on top of her. I pushed into her mouth and moved my hands over her breasts. Susan shoved gently against my chest and tugged at my shirt and dropped it on the floor. Skin to skin now. I kissed her mouth and her nipples and every inch of skin in between. We lay there on the sofa with Dial M for Murder playing in the background and made out and touched and breathed in each other like teenage sweethearts with no bed to go to. Susan guided my hand again, this time to her legs and over her impossibly warm, smooth inner thigh and inside the blue cotton shorts. As I pushed her panties aside and my fingers found the silky places where she wanted to be touched and I wanted to touch, Susan began to unbutton my jeans. Suddenly she pushed, "Come on." I said, "Was something wrong?" Standing now next to the sofa in nothing but a pair of mini-skirt-looking shorts and framed by Hitchcock's glow, she said, "Let's go to the bedroom." My brain's usual blood supply was otherwise engaged, and I was a little dazed by the past half hour and by the sudden interruption. I looked at her and blinked. She said, "Hurry," and I did. Then I didn't. The next morning, Susan leaned over and kissed my lips. Then as she turned and reached to click on the bedside lamp, she said, "Nowhere to be, and nothing I have to do, and you absolutely deserve a day off." When she had leaned over to turn on the light, the sheet had fallen to her waist, and I was conducting a thorough and thoroughly satisfying study of her breasts. I said, "You know what we could do?" Susan gave me a look. "You could go check on Carly to make sure she's all right." "Yeah, that's what I was going to say." Susan laughed and rolled off the bed, and from my perspective, made a very nice job of walking to the bathroom. I sat up, swung my feet to the floor, and pushed up. My jeans were in a tangle against the baseboard 10 feet from the bed. I pulled them on and went to the living room with the intention of retrieving my shirt and Susan's bronze shirt before Carly found them. I still had a chance to be discreet. The faint hum of Susan's shower dissipated as I moved down the hallway. On through the hall and the study and then into the living room, I found nothing but quiet. I had gathered up our clothes and started back when, for some reason, I stopped in the study and listened. And there was nothing, almost too much nothing, and I was overwhelmed by the feeling that Susan and I were in the house alone. I trotted across the study floor, turned away from Susan's room, and hung a left down a second hallway. Carly's paneled door was on the right. I knocked, nothing. I knocked again and called her name, still nothing. Carly? Carly, answer me. I'm coming in now, so cover yourself up or whatever you need to do. The knob twisted in my hand, but the door stood immobile. I called out again and remembered my own pseudo-shrink comment that constant napping and sleeping like Carly had been doing was a form of temporary suicide. I thought about kicking the door in, but decided that might be an overreaction, and I wasn't even sure if I could do it. There was 2 inches of antique oak between Carly and me. I ran to get Susan. Thank God the bathroom door was unlocked. Inside, Susan sloshed in the shower, and I could barely see through all the billowing steam stuffed into the small tiled room. Through fogged glass, I could just make out Susan scrubbing suds out of her hair and rinsing foam off her face. 2 beats passed while she washed away soap and shampoo, and she said, "Maybe she's just sleeping hard." But even as she spoke, Susan stepped out of the shower and grabbed a terry cloth robe off a hook on the door. I'm ashamed to say that even then, and even under those circumstances, I was struck and aroused by all that beautiful wet skin. I'm pleased to say that I did not pause to enjoy either the view or the fantasy. Susan wasn't running, but she was moving fast. She said, "Go back and try again. Ludi keeps all the keys on hooks in the kitchen. I'll be right there." I didn't have Susan's self-control. I sprinted, as much as anyone can sprint in an old house full of antiques, back to Carly's door. Still, nothing but quiet. I banged and called and banged some more, and out of nowhere, Susan was beside me, pushing an antique skeleton key into the lock. She swung the door open, and we stepped into the room. The bed was made. The window was open. And Carly was gone. We stood stunned. When we moved, Susan ran to the window, and I performed the same lame search as I had the last time Carly's bed had been unexpectedly empty. She wasn't in the closet or under the bed this time either, and neither were any of her things. But there was a penciled note on the vanity. I called Susan over, and when she turned to face me, white showed all around her bright blue irises. The note was on the same notebook paper Carly had been using for all her drawings. On the top half of the page, Carly had sketched a picture of Susan's antique step-side pickup with tall grass all around, and what looked like a rose bush covering the front wheel. On the bottom half, she had simply written, "Thanks. Sorry, Carly." When Susan spoke, her voice fluttered just above a whisper. "It looks like she took off last night after she left us in the kitchen." "Probably." In contrast to Susan's strained syllables, my voice sounded loud and uncouth in the abandoned bedroom. I self-consciously lowered and calmed my voice. It had to take some time to draw this, I said. "Go out front and check the sidewalks. I'll check in back." Susan turned and flew through the bedroom door. I pushed the note inside my hip pocket, put my feet through the bottom half of the tall, open window, and sat on the sill. Turning and sliding, I caught the sill with both hands and dropped the last few feet to the ground. A teenage girl could easily have done the same thing, and she had. The mud-gripped tread of Carly's sports sandals was pressed neatly into the soft earth of a flower bed. She had barely missed stomping the freshly planted tulip bulbs Ludi had assigned to her care when she first arrived. Textured footprints moved off the bed at an angle. The few diluted drops of creek blood flowing through my veins didn't help me track her steps. I followed the angle, but after that couldn't really tell what she had done. It seemed likely, though, that Carly had moved parallel with Monterey Street, crossing 3 contiguous back lawns before being forced by a tall privacy fence to turn back toward the street and hit the sidewalk. Following my guesswork route, I circled around to the street and met Susan trotting down the sidewalk. She halted in front of me. Her wide eyes had narrowed with focus. I asked, "Have you got your pickup around here somewhere?" Susan's voice was clear now. "It's parked around off the alley, out of sight. You'd better get it. She's probably long gone, but it'd be stupid not to split up and cover the streets around here." We turned and walked hurriedly toward the house. Inside, Susan got dressed in less than a minute, shedding her robe, pulling on panties, jeans, and running shoes, and sliding a green T-shirt over wet hair which she didn't bother to brush. I put on last night's clothes, grabbed a mouthful of scope, sloshed a little, and spit in the sink. As Susan turned the key in Ludi's front door, I said, "Just drive up and down the streets looking, and take a good look at any parks you come across. I'll cover the bus stops and work my way toward downtown." I asked, "What's the code on Ludi's answering machine?" "I don't know. Why?" "I'm trying to figure out how one of us can let the other know if we find her." I handed her my cell phone. Here, I'll find a phone and call you in an hour. If one of us hasn't come across her by then, it'll be time to get Joey on it. Susan said, tell me his number. I'll call him now. And she was right, of course. I told her Joey's office and cell phone numbers. As I climbed into my Jeep, Susan strode through Luty's side yard toward the alley. Her face was pale and concentrated as she punched buttons on the tiny gray flip phone. An hour later, I called. We agreed to keep going. An hour after later, even over cell phone static, I could hear defeat in Susan's voice. Joey was inside Luty's house when I arrived. The air crackled with tension. I sat and explained everything I knew about Carly's disappearance. After Susan arrived and joined us in the living room, Joey leaned forward in his chair and propped his elbows on his knees. He looked at the piece of hardwood floor between the hush puppies for a few seconds, and then up at me. Letting a teenage girl slip out of here under our nose is shit. Susan scrunched up her eyebrows. She looked at me, then at Joey, then back at me again. I rolled my eyes and said, "It's nobody's fault, Joey, and nobody, not even you, can be everywhere." Susan piped in on cue. "You're the best. Anyone else would be making excuses or covering up. But you're here pointing out non-existent mistakes and taking full blame." She walked over and squeezed his huge hand. Joey said, "This turned touchy-feely all of a sudden, didn't it?" Susan laughed and slapped him lightly on the top of his head. "Well, now that everyone's cuddly again, we need to figure out where our client is. I got somebody at the bus station, and I got someone at the airport, even though I doubt Carly's got the money to take a plane to the nearest hub. By the way, how much money does she have?" Susan knitted her eyebrows again and shook her head. I don't know. Carly probably had some tips from her last night at the Pelican's Roost, but I never asked her. Luty gave her some clothes and bought her a few more." Joey asked, "Have you checked your purse?" Susan said, I don't think Carly would have. "I'm not saying she's a crook, Susan." The girl was scared shitless of Leroy Purcell from what Tom tells me. "Just go check your purse." Susan pointed at an antique sideboard against the back wall and said, "It's right there on the table." She walked over and looked inside. "My whole wallet's gone." She sounded tired. I said, "Call MasterCard and American Express and whatever other cards you got. Check on recent purchases. Tell them your daughter sneaked off with your cards. Say you don't want the police involved, but you want to know if someone tries to charge anything." Susan asked, "Will they do that?" Joey said, "Sometimes, not always." How much money is missing?" Susan said, "I don't know, somewhere between $200 and $300. Joey stood. "I'm going to go call my man at the airport. On Southwest Airlines, that little girl could fly just about any damn where Southwest goes for $300. "Good. What now?" "I think I'm going to go mess with Leroy Purcell." "Why on earth would you do that?" "Because it seems the only time we learn anything in this case is when things get stirred up. And I'm tired of the other guy doing all the stirring. This is something I've been giving serious thought to. I want to give Purcell something to think about besides looking for you and Carly. So I'm going to try to mess with his mind a little and see if I can split his attention and maybe even get him to make a mistake." Susan said, "Can I help?" "Yeah, I think you probably can." I awoke Tuesday morning in a strange room in Seaside, Florida. A pale blue ceiling floated over the bed. Two sandy yellow walls angled together and formed a square with another right angle of walls painted the blue-green color of shallow Gulf water on a summer morning. The bed's driftwood headboard swirled with hand-painted shells and fish and mermaids. Found object sculptures decorated only one sand-colored wall. All the other walls were left blank to catch the sunshine and the changing shadows of outside vegetation projected through oversized windows. The room, in short, was horribly and expensively whimsical. A soft tangle of brunette hair lay on the pillow next to my own sandy head. The covers had fallen away to reveal one perfect female shoulder and a strong, firm rib cage that flowed into that wonderful woman place where narrow waist meets the beginning swell of hips. I ran my hand over the exposed, cool curve of her hip and circled her waist with my arm. My hand moved over the dimple of her navel and stopped at her ribs to pull her warm back against my chest and stomach and her rounded bottom against my thighs. I kissed the shoulder. She stirred and yawned, and Susan turned on her back to look at me. I propped up on my left elbow